My name is Ellsworth Raymond Johnson. But on these streets, they call me Bumpy. And I want to tell you a story about power. Not the kind that comes from a barrel of a gun or a fistful of dollars, but the kind that whispers in the silence between heartbeats. The kind that can turn a king into a pawn with nothing but a few well-chosen words. This is the story of the day I made a single phone call, and how that call brought the most powerful man in Harlem to his knees without me ever leaving my chair. You have to understand the Harlem I returned to. I'd just done 10 years in Alcatraz. 10 years of cold stone and colder men. The Rock, they called it. It wasn't a prison, it was a tomb for the living. But it was also a library. A quiet place to study the nature of men, of fear, of control. I read Sun Tzu in that library. I read Machiavelli. And I planned. When the gates finally clanged shut behind me and I breathed the air of my city again, it was different. The rhythm was off. There was a new sickness in the gutters, a poison being peddled not in back alleys, but with a smirk and a license from the new landlords. The Italians. The Genovese family. And their man in my backyard was Vincent Gigante. They called him Chin. Chin was no street corner thug. He was a strategist in his own right, a former boxer who knew how to take a punch to land a bigger one. He played the crazy man, wandering around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe, mumbling to himself. It was a brilliant act. It made people underestimate him, dismiss him. But I knew better. A wolf in a bathrobe is still a wolf. He saw my return as an inconvenience. He saw Harlem as conquered territory. And he decided to send me a message. Not with a bomb or a bullet, but with something far more insulting, a display of utter disrespect. He had one of my oldest friends taken. Not a soldier, not anymore. An old-timer named Samuel who ran a small numbers spot. A man who was more a symbol of the old ways than any real threat. They snatched him off his doorstep in broad daylight, blindfolded him, and threw him in a basement. The message wasn't, "I will kill you." The message was, "I don't even consider you worth killing. I will simply take what is yours, and you will watch, helpless." My young men, they were all fire and fury. They wanted to burn down the world. They came to me, eyes blazing, hands on their pieces, waiting for the word. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I told them to put their guns away. I told them the war wasn't going to be fought in the streets. It was going to be fought in the mind. And for that, I needed information, not infantry. So, I became a ghost. For 2 days, I wasn't Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem Godfather. I was a shadow, a listener. I visited people who existed in the spaces between the worlds. A bail bondsman who heard things in his sleep. A clerk at the motor vehicles office who knew every alias. A tired waitress in a diner where cops and criminals both drank their coffee. I paid for whispers, for fragments of lives. And I went to see my old friend, Malcolm. We sat in the back of a mosque, not to talk of God, but to talk of man. Of weakness. I told him about Chin's act, the bathrobe, the mumbling. Malcolm, he was a man who understood performance. He looked at me and said, "The loudest scream is often to cover the softest spot. Find what he's screaming to protect." And that's when the final piece clicked. From a chauffeur who'd been paid for a very discreet, very long drive upstate, I learned of a trip. A trip to a quiet, leafy town in Westchester. A trip to drop off a quiet, well-dressed boy at a gated school. A son. Vincent Gigante had a son he kept a secret from his own world, a son he dreamed a clean, white picket fence life for. That was it. That was the king on his chessboard. Not his money, not his soldiers. That boy. On the morning of the third day, the rain had stopped. The sky was the color of old steel. I put on my best suit. I told my men to make sure the social club was empty, silent. I poured 2 fingers of good bourbon, didn't drink it. I just let it sit there, catching the weak light. Then I picked up the phone. I dialed the number for the Vesuvio restaurant myself. I knew he'd be there, holding court over a late breakfast. When his voice came on the line, it was thick with smugness, with the absolute certainty of a man sitting on a mountain. "Ellsworth," he said, and I could hear the smile in it. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Calling to talk terms for your old man?" "It's a little late for that." I let his words hang in the static between us. I took a slow breath. And when I spoke, my voice was so calm, so flat, it didn't even sound like my own. It was the voice of the Alcatraz stone. "Vincent," I said, "I'm not calling about Samuel. I'm calling about Vincent Jr. How is he settling in at the Briarwood Academy? Does he like his new room? The one with the view of the oak tree?" The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a vacuum. I could imagine the scene perfectly. The fork freezing halfway to his mouth. The blood draining from his face, leaving it the color of ash. The slow, cold terror seizing his heart. I waited. I let that terror grow, let it fill the space in his mind until there was room for nothing else. Then I continued, each word a drop of ice water. "I am not a man who makes threats, Vincent. I am a man who states facts. As we speak, two gentlemen are parked in a sensible sedan across the street from Briarwood's main gate. They are reading the newspaper. They have been there since the boy walked in this morning. Their only job is to observe. To confirm a logistical reality for me. They are not there to harm a hair on his head. They are there so that you understand I am not playing a hunch. I am looking at the board." I could hear his breath now, a shallow, ragged scrape against the receiver. "Here are the facts, Vincent," I said. "You will have Samuel brought to the front steps of the Apollo Theater by 6 o'clock tonight. He will be in the same condition he was in when you took him. You will then instruct all of your associates that their business, from this day forward, ends at 125th Street. They will not cross that line. Not for business, not for pleasure. In return, the gentleman in the sedan will drive away. The location of Briarwood Academy will fade from my memory, and from the memory of anyone who works for me. This conversation will not be referenced again. This is not a negotiation. This is the new reality." Another long silence. Then, a sound. It was the sound of a man's will breaking. Not a shout, not a curse. A whisper, thin and defeated, stripped of all its armor. "All right," he breathed. "All right, Johnson. It's done." The line went dead. I placed the receiver back in its cradle. I looked at the bourbon, then out the window at my city. At 5:58 that evening, a car pulled up to the Apollo. Samuel got out, confused, disheveled, but whole. He walked up those steps a free man. And just like that, the war was over before a single shot was fired. They think power is fear. And it is, partly. But the fear of a bullet is simple. It's quick. The fear I gave Vincent Gigante that day was different. It was the slow, chilling fear of vulnerability. The fear that the one thing you thought was hidden, the one thing you thought was safe and pure and beyond the reach of your dirty world, is not. I didn't beat him with strength. I didn't outgun him. I outthought him. I showed him that his castle had a hidden door, and that I held the key. From that day on, he ruled his territory, and I ruled mine. But he never looked at Harlem the same way again. He knew that somewhere in the shadows, my mind was working, always working. And that knowledge was a prison far more secure than Alcatraz ever was. That is power. The power of a single, perfect, devastating piece of information, delivered in a calm voice over a telephone wire. The power of knowing that sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is the one you never have to fire.